Hi there, my name's Brenton and I'm the designer and builder of the Audrey 2 puppets you see behind me. In this video, I'm going to take you through how to set them up when they arrive at your theatre, how to operate them, and how to get the most out of them for your production of Little Shop of Horrors. A couple of general tips for using the puppets. It's usually best to have one puppeteer that can do all of pods 1, 3, and 4. That way they can build up a relationship with your actor who's doing the voice. You can have multiple puppeteers doing them, but it just takes more time for that relationship to build. Another tip is that when you're rehearsing pods 3 and pods 4, don't start rehearsing inside the actual puppets. Get your actor to sit on a chair or just stand in the middle of your shop and mimic the movements that they'd be doing inside the puppet, but without it. So that way they can actually have a full field of vision to where your actors are on stage. One of the keys of bringing these puppets to life is actually having them interact with your cast members. So by rehearsing without the heads on, it allows your puppeteer to know where he needs to be pointing the puppets during the performance. Here we have pod 1. The first thing that'll happen for this pod on stage is in the cue in the script, it asks for the leaves to wilt. That's achieved by a little pull ring on the back that Seymour just pulls down and clips into place on the little screw underneath. And from the front, with a bit of practice, you can do it without even noticing. Depending on how you've blocked your production of Little Shop, your puppeteer for pod 1 may have to start underneath the counter at the very start of the show and just patiently wait there until their cue. To operate the insides of pod 1, the puppeteer needs to pull out the foam ring inside, and that will give them access to the Velcro straps and also the pull cords to keep the pod in place. Let's head underneath the counter and I'll show you how to set it up inside there. During Grow for me, Seymour will bring the pot over to the counter, place it over the top of your pre-cut hole, and then that's when your puppeteer underneath gets to work. Once your puppeteer sees that Seymour's put the pod down on top of the hole, their job is to pull out that foam ring, fish around so that you get the 2 purple straps and the 4 pieces of Velcro out. Attach the 2 pieces of Velcro on either side to the 4 straps inside, and that will then secure the pot down so that it can't move around up on your counter. Pull down on the 2 purple straps and insert your hand inside the pod. Your 4 fingers go on one half and then your thumb goes up in the other half. And once your hand's inside, you're ready to perform your actions for the number. On cue, you can open and close your hand to open and close the mouth of the pod. It can snap at Seymour when he's giving him his blood, and then at the end of the number, simply wiggle your hand up and you can make the puppet grow inside. One tip that I'd recommend is that when Seymour puts the pod down on the counter and your puppeteer underneath is fishing through trying to get it all in place, have Seymour stand there and hold the pot in place for a little bit as if he's tending to it, and that will stop the audience from seeing the puppeteer moving anything around inside. Another tip is that when Seymour's dropping his blood from his finger into the mouth, quite a lot of the time you can actually see his shadow on the set behind you. So you can use that as a visual cue for when to open and close the mouth underneath. At the end of the night, when you're getting ready to reset for the next show, all you need to do is undo the Velcro straps from the bottom, pull everything up, tuck the 4 Velcro straps inside, along with the 2 purple straps. Take that black ring of foam and push it inside the hole again, and make sure that it's a nice tight fit in there, and then everything is ready to go for the next day.
Here we have pod 2. Pod 2 is worn by Seymour on stage. Inside the jacket, there is a black vest that Seymour puts on first, and then the club jacket goes on afterwards, zips up the front so that it finds. The jacket's a little bit small on myself, so I won't do it up fully, but you get the idea of how it fits on an actor. Seymour's got his right arm running up through the stalk of the puppet and into the head with a claw grip. The top fingers go in the top half of the jaw, the thumb goes into a little slot at the bottom, and that gives Seymour full control of the pod. Some tips on getting the most out of this for your performance is try and block it so that the fake arm is upstage whenever you can, because that'll help hide the illusion. And also keep the pod alive as much as you can. And that means just moving it around a little bit, just slightly, just so that it's not sitting there dead like this.
Pod 3 will come delivered to you in all of these pieces that you see before you. There's the pod and stalk itself, which does have its own calico bag that it goes in. There is the pot, which has the chair attached, 3 leaves for the back of the pot, and then another calico bag which has all the roots and legs inside of it. To set Pod 3 up once she's arrived at your theatre, the first thing to do is put the leaves in the back of the pot. The way to do that is take off the pool noodle safety cover and then insert the metal strip into the 3 slots found around the back of the pot. The best configuration for them is for the middle leaf to be in front of the 2 outside leaves. That allows them to move around and bounce when your puppeteer swings the head around. The next thing to do to set up the Pod 3 is to attach the 2 roots that have the clips on the end. They clip into the back leg of the seat on each side. Now that Pod 3 is in this state, it can be left like this for the duration of your run, and you can just lift this whole unit on stage as it is. I'll now walk you through what the Pod 3 puppeteer does inside the pod to make it come to life. So the first thing for them to do is to put on the pants and the roots, which I'll show you a little later. Once Pod 3 is set on stage, they can come in, sit down on the chair, scoot as far to the back as they can, and then clip the seat belt in. Make sure it's nice and tight and the padding is around the middle, and that'll help protect you and also keep you in the chair. Once you're buckled in, you can see that you can lean forward and around in any direction you like, and that pod isn't going to go anywhere. Your base position will be sitting cross-legged with the pod on top of you. Because the inside of the mouth has fabric, you will need to sit slightly off to one side so that you can get around that piece of fabric. But once you're in, get comfortable because you are there for about 15 minutes during the dentist scene and Mushnik and Son. Inside the pod, you'll find a couple of plastic pipes that you'll grip onto, and those are what you'll use to move the puppet around and to make it talk. Now, because you're sitting in this position for about 15 minutes before you actually come to life, it's going to be quite tiresome on your arms if you're holding them up in the air to keep that pod closed for that long. So inside the bottom half, you'll actually find a piece of yellow rope. That can be thread up through a couple of holes in the mouth plate and then back down the other side, and then all you have to do is sit there holding onto that rope, and that'll automatically keep the 2 halves of the pod closed. When it's time to come to life, just feed that rope back through down to the bottom half, pull your arms up into the pod, and then you're ready to come to life. So the basic movements inside the pod, you move it forward, you can then look around from left to right, you can go up and down, and then just pull your arms apart and push them back together, and that'll get it to talk for you. When it's ready to come alive fully, you can then fling your legs out, and then you'll have full movement around for the pod. Don't be afraid to go wild with it, because once you're strapped in, you can throw yourself around as much as you want. Before your puppeteer comes on stage, he can get himself in his root pants and root feet. The pants just have Velcro strap, and the feet, I'll show you how to put them on now. Inside is a half shoe that you slide your toes into. You wrap the strap around the back of your ankle and clip in and tighten. The way you know you've got the left and right on the right foot is that the clips will always be on the outside edge. Once your foot's tightened in, you can then bring up the extra fabric, Velcro it onto the legs, try and match up the vines wherever you can, and then Velcro up the back seam as well. Once that's all in place, grab the big leaf and attach it to the Velcro on the very back, clip around the front with the shorter leaf, and then you're all strapped in, ready to go. So, once you've got the pot set on stage, your puppeteer can come in and sit in it like I explained before. Scoot themselves to the back as far as they can, seatbelt on, and legs crossed. Once he's in this position, a couple of stagehands can then come along and grab the pod and lower it down on top of your puppeteer. At the bottom of the stalk, you'll find 3 XLR cables. You'll also find 3 adjoining XLR cables in the base of the pod. This is to allow the green vines on the top of the pod to light up. Before they put it on top of you, either yourself or one of your stagehands can match the colors on them and just plug them in. That can now be tucked behind you, out of the way. And now it's time to lower this down on top of you. The front has a little flap that goes down between your legs and then Velcros underneath each leg to give a seamless join between the stalk and into the roots. All right, guys, let's go. As you can see, that middle flap gets put down between the puppeteer's legs and then Velcroed to each side of the main stalk. Once in place, the puppeteer can cross their legs. They may need some help from a stagehand to do this, and then the rest of the roots can be tucked in around them. Inside the mouth, there is a tongue that the puppeteer can put his arms into and use during the final scene of Act 1, where Seymour feeds him the dentist's body parts. In order to still be able to use the bottom jaw when your hand is in the tongue sleeve, there is a little slot that you can slide your fingers into to grip onto another plastic bar, giving you control of that bottom jaw. At the very back of the pod, underneath the tongue, there is an opening slit where the food that Seymour's fed can be pulled in. Your puppeteer and Seymour should spend some time together working out what will get fed. This will allow the puppeteer to play with the food a bit and work out the best ways to get it through that hole. Inside the pot is where you'll find the electronics for Pod 3 that can be controlled from your lighting console should you wish to use them. There is a power supply that is screwed down to the base, as well as a container that holds the circuit board.
Out the back of the pod is a power lead, as well as 2 XLR leads, which are your DMX in and out. Note that the system will still work even if you don't have anything plugged into the DMX out lead. The circuit board controls the LED strips in the pod and runs 2 RGB circuits for a total of 6 channels. If you want to use the lighting, chat with your lighting designer and they'll be able to use the dip switches to set the circuit board start address to read the signal coming from the lighting desk.
At the end of your run, when it's time to pack up and return the puppet, all you need to do is unclip the 2 roots and put them into their calico bag, along with the feet and the pants that your puppeteer has been wearing. You pull out the 3 large leaves, slide their covers back on, and you put the pod back in its calico bag, and then it's ready to be shipped back. Pod 4 takes a minimum of 3 people to operate, 1 inside the pod itself, and 1 on each of the claw arms. Depending on how much weight your center puppeteer can hold, you may also require a 4th puppeteer at the back to help lift down on the counterweight mechanism, which helps support the puppeteer inside. Audrey 2 Pod 4 will be delivered to you in quite a few pieces. The biggest one will obviously be the pod itself, who's on her own truck with wheels and brakes. You'll also have 2 large claw arms, 9 leaves, and a bunch of weights for her counterweight mechanism. This is how the back of Audrey 2 Pod 4 will look when she arrives at your theatre. To set her up for performances, what you need to do is open up the 2 fabric flaps, undo the 3 bolts on either side, and then transfer the arm supports around to the other side of the steel upright. Once the 3 bolts are undone, slide off the arm support, take out the 3 bolts and reverse them so that there's no bolts protruding into the entrance and exit points for the plant. Once you've got the arm support on the 3 bolts, put the washer and nut back on and make sure you do them up tightly so that it doesn't wiggle around. When Pod 4 is delivered to you, it won't have the weights on its support beam. So to put them on or take them off, simply undo the 2 nuts on one side, take off the couple of washers that are on there, slide out the support pole, and now you can just unload the weights. As you can see, on each side of the center bar, you've got 2 10 kilo weights, 2 5 kilo weights, and 1 2.5 kilo weight. Never operate the puppet without this securing rod in place. Whilst the weights do tend to stay on the bar, you do run the risk of them falling off if you don't put this back in place.
With the arm supports and weights on, this part of Pod 4 is now set up. The great thing here is that the arm supports can be left in this outside position for the duration of your run until you come to pack it up after your final performance. As for the weights, it will be up to you as to whether you remove the weights after each show or not. The whole unit can easily be wheeled around with the weights in place, but for the production that you're seeing in the video, our shop was actually a raised truck. So we took the weights on and off each day so that we could lift the Pod 4 unit up onto the shop truck.
Once you've got her on stage, What you can do is you can take this harness off, and what the harness does is just allows you to transport her around and move her around your theatre easily without all the roots just dragging along the ground. Simply unclip each of the roots, making your way all the way around, and then unclip the harness from its secure point at the back, and then that can be removed for your performance. At the end of the show, or the next night when you want to preset and take Audrey off stage again, put the harness back on, clip all the roots up into it so that you can easily wheel her around.
At the front and back of the truck are sets of wheels with brakes. There are 2 at the front, shown here, and another 4 at the rear. Please make sure that all 6 brakes are engaged once Pod 4 is set in its place on stage for Act 2. To install the claw arms, make sure that you have the right and left arm on the appropriate side. Undo the bolt in the pivot mechanism and make sure that the straight uprights of the support are at the back. Then place the arm into the gap, thread the bolt back through, and hand tighten the nut. At the end of the little root extension, there is half a clip, where you will find the other half on the main body of Pod 4. Simply clip them together to complete the setup. To complete the look of Pod 4, around the back of the pod there are leaves that help hide the mechanism as well as add scale to the puppet. These are numbered 1 to 9 in an anti-clockwise direction. Note that numbers 2 and 8 are actually 2 leaves that are connected together to help hide the arm pivot mechanism. These leaves, as well as the 2 claw arms, should be installed and removed after each performance, so that Pod 4 takes up less room backstage and is easier to manoeuvre around. Each leaf has its number written on the back near the aluminium arm, and there are matching numbers on the main frame where the sockets are. Simply slot the correct leaf into its socket to install them. At this point, Audrey 2 is now ready to go for Act 2. The setup for Pod 4 does take place during interval, so your crew have plenty of time to get her into position and attach the claw arms and leaves. Depending on where you store her backstage and how many crew you have, this setup can take about 10 minutes to complete.
With Audrey 2 now fully set up on stage, I'll take you through how to operate her. So for the operator inside, you'll have a steel bar that comes up along one shoulder with a padded support on it. That'll be the main mechanism you use to lift the pod up. You've then got 2 bars in front of you. A bar up the top that controls the top jaw, and a bar underneath that controls the bottom jaw, which allows you to open and close. So inside, you have to crawl in, you'll start duck down with the steel beam on your shoulder. When it's your cue to come alive, you'll lift up, holding the bottom jaw up in place, and when you need to talk, you'll lower the bottom jaw. You can move it around like a hang glider. There's a pivot mechanism just above your head. And then lower back down when it's time to rest.
So as you can see here from the back, you stand up with the beam over one shoulder, and this raises the pod into the air. That 65 kilos of counterweight will take most of the weight of the puppet to make it easier for your puppeteer. You can then turn the pod left and right, and then push down on the lower bar to open and close the mouth. When you lower the puppet back down, always make sure that it is facing the front and not to one side, so that it doesn't get damaged. To operate the claw arms, firstly make sure that the crew have positioned the leaves to cover the mechanism. Then, you just push down on the weight to the back to lift the claw arm up and move it around. Don't push down too hard, only put on enough force to lift them into the air. Make sure your puppeteers get plenty of practice using these, as they are quite long and the puppeteers will have limited visibility behind the leaves. The whole length of them is padded, so if they do hit a cast member, it won't hurt them.
So obviously one of the big things that Pod 4 does is it eats people. I'm going to walk you through the 3 deaths in order so that you have an idea of how to do them with your cast. First up is Mushnik. So to set the puppet up for eating people, inside there are 4 oki straps or elastic straps clipped to 4 points inside the top half of the pod. Your puppeteer will need to disengage those, let them drop to the ground, and that will allow the pod to open up to its full extent.
Here are the 4 straps inside. 2 on the left, 1 long and 1 short, and then 2 on the right. Once again, a long one that goes up to the top and a short one that goes to the lower point. Your puppeteer unhooks the 4 of them and places them down. It doesn't matter what order they are done in. They can then grab the top bar and lift it up while pushing forward slightly to open the mouth to its full extent. With the puppeteer standing up, you can see there is quite a bit of space there for your actor to sink down into and crawl out. They will be able to push the red fabric out of the way as they crawl through. Once you have eaten a cast member, hook the 4 straps back up and make sure that the long ones go up to the top, and then you are ready to use the pod as normal again. There is an extra strap that is linked to itself in the pod. This currently doesn't have a use, so just leave it where it is.
When it's time for Mushnik to die, he'll come up to the side of the pod, knock 3 times, and the puppeteer will grab hold of that top bar and lift right up into the air. A couple of things to make certain is that the center of the pod is in the center of the truck, like here, so that it will actually open to its full extent. Now in here, right here is where your puppeteer is, just behind the back of the mouth here. And also at this joint here is where there is a steel bar. That's what's used to operate the bottom jaw of the puppet. So your 3 actors who get eaten will need to navigate their way around those when they get inside. So once the mouth is open, Mushnik can then step inside the center of the bottom jaw, get down on his knees, act as though he's looking around, and then on your 3 musical cues, your puppeteer can drop the top jaw down and look as though he's eating Mushnik. Mushnik will have to help with this though, and duck right down out of the way each time, because there isn't much room for him to sit where the top plate is. So Mr. Puppeteer, come down and eat me. So down once, twice, and then the 3rd music cue, he stays down. So as you would have seen there, after that 3rd drop, the puppeteer has lifted the bottom jaw up as well to make it look as though the puppet is swallowing Mushnik. And what that does is that also lifts that bottom pipe out of the way so that Mushnik can crawl between the puppeteer's legs and out the back.
When it's time for Audrey to be fed to the plant, the puppeteer can open the pod wide on a music cue, and Seymour can then lift Audrey and feed her in feet first into the mouth, so that your actress can then help support her weight as soon as her feet touch the ground on the inside. Once Audrey is fully inside, Seymour can then guide the top half of the mouth down to finish the feed. If your cast don't feel comfortable or safe lifting Audrey into the pod, you can have Audrey support herself up onto Seymour's leg. Seymour can then pivot around and with his back to the audience, make it look like he's putting Audrey into the pod's mouth. In reality, Audrey is putting herself into the mouth and supporting her own weight. You can have the claw arms come in to help hide this movement, and once you add in lighting to this, it completes the effect. For Seymour's death at the end of the show, your puppeteer has to very quickly undo the 4 straps, as Audrey 2 has only just finished talking with Seymour. Get the claw arms to come right in and look as though they are trying to stop Seymour from getting in. Seymour can then push these out of the way before opening the mouth and getting in. As with all of the deaths, your cast should never forcibly open the mouth, but just act like they are opening it, leaving it to the puppeteer to do the movement. A couple of things to be aware of. Whilst the pods are built around a sturdy frame with quite a bit of structure, they are lightweight in order for them to be easy to puppeteer and get the range of movement that they do. This means that they are not weight-bearing. When rehearsing or performing with them, please make sure that your cast are not putting all of their weight onto the lips of the puppet while getting in and out of the mouth. And also that when they do get into the mouth, that they are not stepping onto the bottom jaw, but are instead stepping straight onto the truck underneath. The same goes for the teeth. They are made out of foam, so they will not hurt anyone if they hit against them or get their arm caught between them. But this means that they are a little fragile, so ask your cast to be aware of them when getting in and out of the mouth and to not rub their body or feet against them. The electrics for Pod 4 are at the back of the truck and are identical to Pod 3 and operate in the same way. Once again, you don't need to use the lighting if you don't want to. There is the power lead and DMX leads, and the container with the circuit board in. Just like Pod 3, ask your lighting designer to set the dip switches to the correct address for the lighting console to control. Because both puppets are never on stage at the same time, you can use the same sets of channels for both pods. With a large part of the structure of Pod 4 made from metal, it can sometimes squeak a bit. One place where it can squeak is the main pivot for the counterweight mechanism. If it does squeak, just shoot some WD-40 into both sides of the pivot near the centre bolt. Another place where it can squeak is the pivot points between the top and bottom jaw. Once again, just squirt a little bit of WD-40 against both of these and that should solve it. They can be found on the inside of the left and right of the pod. The last thing to be aware of with Pod 4 is the pivot mechanism. This is made from a modified tow bar and socket and is found on the inside of Pod 4. When the weights are removed from the back of the pod, the tow bar can sometimes slip out of the socket. So when you are putting weights back on, make sure that the tow bar slots back into the socket. Also, ensure that the piece of fabric is still covering the ball as it slots into the socket, as this stops any squeaking from this area and also helps give a smoother motion.
At the end of your season, when it's time to pack up Audrey 2, all you need to do is take all the weights off, return the arm supports back to their inside position, bolt them in place, swing the fabric arms right the way around, back in place, all on both sides, put the harness on the front, and then it's ready to go in a truck. And so that brings us to the end of this video. I hope that's given you a great insight into how to set up and use the plants, and I wish you all the best for your production.